This week, I'm joined by Rand Hindi, founder and CEO of Zama.ai, a startup pioneering a new age of privacy through what is known as Homomorphic encryption. Rand holds a PhD in Bioinformatics, which he's put to good use as a serial entrepreneur and angel investor. His first company, Snips, produced a custom B2B AI-powered voice assistant that was later acquired by speaker and home sound system company Sonos. When he's not running his latest startup, he moonlights as a deep tech investor with a thesis towards companies working on privacy, blockchain, high-performance computing, medical hardware, bioinformatics, and psychedelics. We cover a lot of ground in today's discussion, from AlphaFold's latest protein discovery, to the paradox of consumer blockchain applications, to psychedelics and mental health. It was a pleasure speaking with Rand, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Now, without further delay, I bring you Rand Hindi. Yeah, I was looking at some of your background online, and kind of the headline is, that you started coding when you were 10, and you built a social network at 14, and a web agency, and then you got into machine learning, and you had an early PhD. So obviously very polymathic. And then if you take a look at your resume past that, you've done quite a bit as well. So maybe just to start, you could summarize a bit about your academic background and interests, and we can go from there.
Sure. So my name is Rand. I've been a developer since I was a kid. I actually started coding when I was 5. And then, always loved computer science, loved, everything related to that. And so when I was 18, I moved to London to study computer science at UCL. And then after that, did a PhD in bioinformatics. And then after that, started building companies. So we can talk about that in a bit, but I'm a serial entrepreneur, right? So I study, I research, and I build, and I invest in companies which are extremely technical and complicated.
Yeah. And so where did you grow up? Were you based in France, or and how did you make the journey over to the UK? Was it just purely for academic reasons, or did you have a family relationship there?
That's actually a funny story. So I grew up in Paris. I was born and grew up in Paris. My parents are from Lebanon, and I always wanted to live abroad and have an international experience. But the reason why I went to the UK specifically is because, let's just say that I was a little bit bored at school, because I would much rather spend my time coding than actually, studying philosophy and history and things like that. And most of the universities in France are very old-fashioned in the sense that even if you have, 100% grade in mathematics and physics, they would still want you to have great grades in Spanish and history to attend a computer science degree. Okay, it doesn't make sense. So I couldn't actually get into the French schools I wanted because of those requirements, and so I decided instead to go to London. And so I literally just went to UCL and hey, I'd like to join the university. I know how to code and everything. And actually, they were very pragmatic. They're like, indeed, you're 18 and you already code very well. You're exactly the kind of student we want. And I kind of really like that. This very concrete type of approach to education. It doesn't matter what grades you have in things which are irrelevant. What matters is what you can do and what's relevant.
Right. And what was your early experience with computer science and coding? How did you get introduced at such a young age, and what struck you as it being something that became a lifelong passion?
We always had computers at home. My dad was in finance, and so we had very early on computers for him to be able to trade and follow the news and everything. And my mom, even though she worked in fashion, she was always kind of like a technology geek. So she would always get all of those cool new gadgets coming from the US or Japan or whatever. And when I was 5, 6 years old, I started literally just dismantling all of those objects to see how they worked. And at some point, my mom was like, okay, you have to stop breaking everything in the house, right? You have to stop taking apart the TV and the washing machine and everything. So we're going to put you in front of a computer. You're going to learn how to code, because at least you can break however many things you want. You're not going to, have to replace them. And so that's how I got into coding, when I was 9, 10 years old. It's because I was breaking everything else that was electronic at home, and she wanted me to do something different. And I was hooked. That was it.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a very clever solution by your mom to stop having you break everything in the house and simultaneously set you up for an interesting career path.
I did end up taking down a few computers in my early teenager hacker days, you know. Actually, I got expelled from school for that once as well. But anyway.
I'm sure that's a story for another time. Yeah, maybe we want to scrub that one from the record. Okay, so we fast forward a little bit. Can you tell me a bit about bioinformatics? I mean, this seems like one of those kind of intersectional areas of study that requires, some math, some physics, some biology, and coding skills. How did you find yourself on that path? And maybe you could just define it for the audience if people aren't familiar with bioinformatics.
Yeah, sure. So bioinformatics is basically AI applied to biology. So you just look at a bunch of biological data, DNA, proteins in your body, whatever you want, and you try to use computer science AI techniques to predict what's going to happen. So, for example, when people tell you your probability of having a cancer based on your DNA, this is bioinformatics. I was interested in bioinformatics because aside from computer science, I've always been passionate about health and biology as well. My deep conviction since I've been a kid is that biology is just a machine. And even though it's a highly complicated, sophisticated machine, way better than anything we can build artificially right now, it's still just a machine. And so computer science and biology in a way are not that dissimilar in the sense of understanding how things fit together. So it's very natural for me to get interested in the intersection of both. And when I was an undergrad, I took a master's class in bioinformatics and actually ended up having the best grade ever in that course, like of every year ever. And so at that point, I was like, okay, well, maybe I should pursue research in that space. And interestingly enough, the research I used to do back then was on protein folding, which was recently solved by DeepMind using artificial intelligence. So,
Yeah, I actually had that as a topic to discuss a little bit later on. So, I mean, that's like a pretty amazing breakthrough for those listening who aren't familiar. The DeepMind, what's it called, AlphaFold, right? Project, and they've been able to predict something like 200,000 or some obscene number of all the proteins.
200 million.
Something. Yeah. Okay. So I'm off by a couple orders of magnitude there. But pretty amazing. I mean, what are for a layperson, what are the implications of being able to predict the protein folding of every known protein in the scientific world?
It's a very big deal because basically proteins, so DNA encodes proteins, right? So basically one gene equals one protein, more or less. And a protein is really just, think of it as a blob, a kind of like blob of amino acids in your body. And this blob has a shape which determines its function. So if you know the shape of a protein, you're able to understand how that protein actually interfaces and interacts with other stuff in your body or elsewhere, right? Not just in the human body, but also in like industry and everything. The problem is that to figure out the shape of a protein, you had to use experimental methods. For example, using a kind of MRI equivalent, but for analyzing molecules and things like that, which was very expensive, very long. And so being able to predict the structure of a protein based on the DNA sequence was a very important topic of research to enable people to very quickly determine what a protein can do, or to understand how a specific mutation in your DNA might affect the way that this protein interfaces with something else in your body, and so on and so forth. So drug discovery, industrial processes, just understanding how things work, understanding diseases, everything is based on understanding protein structure. So the fact that DeepMind did it, I mean, it's a very big deal. Like this is the kind of stuff that could get us like 20 years in the future in terms of medicine. It is the kind of breakthrough we need if we want people to live healthier, longer, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about your investments in kind of in personalized medicine, longevity research. I think there's a lot of interest in med tech devices and that sort of thing. We'll get there in a minute. Maybe just to close out on bioinformatics, I'm curious from my own perspective. I mean, what is there a difference, or maybe they're the same thing? But computational biology, bioinformatics, are they adjacent, or is it essentially the same kind of study?
Like deep learning, machine learning, they're kind of all the same ideas. They're just different techniques in different departments. Personally, I don't think there's a difference, right? But I'm sure that the computational biologists will explain that it's a little bit different bioinformatics for XYZ reason. There are even people that call it complex systems, or they call it biostatistics. Eventually,
Yeah.
all of that is about using computers to understand biology. Right.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Well, after your research and study on bioinformatics, I don't want to say pivoted because I know there was a bit of time in between this and you probably applied it in certain areas, but perhaps maybe your biggest commercial success early on was Snips, which was more on the AI voice recognition platform that you created. So how did you? We've already established you're fairly polymathic. You have quite a bit of interest in a number of different subjects. But how did you move into that direction? What was interesting to you around privacy and voice-based AI systems?
So when I started my undergrad in computer science when I was 18, because I was already coding for a few years, I was kind of bored, right? And so I started taking advanced master's classes as a way to learn new things that wasn't something already new coming in. Bioinformatics was one of them. And another one was artificial intelligence. So I've actually been doing AI since 2003. It was a very, very long time. Deep learning didn't really exist back then. Well, like it was an idea, but it didn't really work, right? So when I discovered AI and machine learning, I understood that instead of programming computers to do things, you could teach them to do things by showing them data that they could reproduce. And that completely shifted my perception of what a computer was and what you could potentially do with it. So eventually I did that for bioinformatics and protein folding, not with the same success as DeepMind, but I tried. And so at that point I was like, okay, maybe bioinformatics is still a little bit too early, right? Maybe the field is not yet advanced enough and the sequencing technology is not yet advanced enough and we're not going to be able to get there. So I'm going to focus on AI. And my initial startup project before Snips was actually a AI nutrition company. Where I was using artificial intelligence to tell people what they should eat or not eat in order to get fit. And as a way to prove that this worked, I put on 35 kilos, so like 70 pounds, that I then lost using my method. So it was a kind of like fat to fit type of marketing approach, right? Unfortunately,
yeah, that's a commitment on the marketing side.
I mean, it's a fun commitment, right? You just basically eat a ton of junk food. I felt horrible. I never have felt as bad at that time. But anyway, unfortunately, that company didn't really happen because when I spoke to potential users, what they said was, we don't really believe in AI, right? So if we want to lose weight, we'll just go to the gym and eat less. It was like, okay, people are not ready for AI. But I knew that AI was a big deal. So I started thinking about, okay, what else can we do with artificial intelligence today that might appeal to people, if not medicine and dieting? And so that's when I got interested in understanding the way that people interact with technology, right? So how do you use your phone? How do you interact with like a connected device in your house? How do you use your computer? So trying to figure out what was the best way that a person could use a machine in the most effective way eventually got me to the conclusion that, well, we got to make the machine understand humans better. Right. And so from that point, there are multiple different directions, and we decided to go for voice specifically because voice is something we use so predominantly as humans. How come we don't use it for machines? Right. So that was kind of like the genesis. But perhaps I think the biggest contribution we made to that space, because let's be honest, you can't really beat Google and Amazon when it comes to how much data you can feed into this voice assistant model, right? But one thing we could do different was privacy. And so from day one in the company, we decided that privacy was going to be an integral part of what we would do. And so we built the first voice technology that could run entirely on your device, on your smartphone, in your TV, in your car, without having to send your voice to a server in the cloud.
Gotcha.
And so that was really kind of like the big idea behind Snips.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was doing a little bit of research earlier, and most people today take for granted the fact that Siri's on their phone or they've got an Alexa in their house. But this was in I don't remember when you launched, something around 2013 or maybe just before that. And it wasn't until 2014 that Alexa from Amazon launched, in 2016 that Google launched their voice assistant. So this is early days, and you obviously didn't have the, like you mentioned, the data supply of a platform like Google or Amazon. So can you walk me through kind of the 0 to 1 thinking here? what was the business plan? Privacy being a clear angle, but without the devices or the end user platform to patch into, how are you planning to go to market? What was the strategy there?
Well, so the strategy changed about 17 times. We started actually trying to build a consumer device. A consumer voice assistant. So kind of like a Siri, but on device on your smartphone. The problem is that we couldn't access enough of the operating system to make the experience seamless, right? You had to unlock your phone and then you had to speak. And so like it was going to be very difficult to be used as much as we hoped for. So eventually we decided to pivot and became a B2B company, offering IoT companies and device manufacturers a way to have their own voice assistant, which would be tailored and specialized for what the device was supposed to do. So instead of doing a general purpose assistant for consumers, we basically went down the route of like special purpose voice assistants for companies as a B2B product. And that's actually how we met Sonos, the company that eventually acquired us. Sonos approached us as a customer initially because they wanted to have a voice assistant dedicated to controlling music and your Sonos devices. They didn't really care about the weather and things like that, right? They just wanted one experience related to music and to device control, which was perfect. So we started talking about it, and then eventually, they asked us if we were willing to join the company, and for me, that was like, great, there's nothing better, and I'm very proud actually because just a month ago or 2 months ago, Sonos rolled out in the US in all their devices our technology. So, that's it. Very cool. There are tens of millions of devices running our technology now, which I think it feels good, right? It really feels good.
Yeah. I mean, that's an amazing thing to have. Every time you go to a party and you see a Sonos speaker and someone's communicating with it, that the underlying code was something that you put together, and that's something to be proud of. I'm curious, when they first approached you and ended up acquiring you, and if this isn't disclosable information, I understand, but what was the strategy to kind of take you in as an R&D arm of the company, or did they want to buy the technology outright and integrate it directly? What was the where did they see the synergies with regard to the acquisition?
I can only comment about what happened before the acquisition because I didn't stay at Sonos after the acquisition, so I don't know how things happened internally, of course. But before the acquisition, the idea, yes, was to basically integrate the technology into Sonos products. As I said, they wanted Sonos to have a pristine, private by design voice experience alongside Alexa and Google Assistant and the other assistants, right? So it's not a competitive thing. It's just they wanted something dedicated to music and to Sonos that worked perfectly well and that protected privacy. And this is where we came in.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that privacy notion is kind of a common thread throughout your work, both as an entrepreneur and as an investor. I think that's a good segue into your second company that you're currently running, Zama.ai, which actually introduced me to the term homomorphic encryption. I had to do a little bit of light research. Well, it's good. I mean, it's category defining in a way, so I think that gives you an angle in the market. Maybe we can start by a quick definition of homomorphic encryption and how it works and why privacy is such an important pillar of your philosophy moving forward, both as an investor and entrepreneur.
Sure. I mean, I guess I can maybe talk first about why privacy matters to me, and then I can explain what we do at Zama.
Great.
So I first understood privacy was an issue when I was 14 years old, because when I was 14, with a friend of mine, we set up a social network in France, which was quite popular amongst teenagers and people in high school and everything. And one time I had a bully at school, right? He was much bigger, older than me, and there was really not much I could do physically to defend myself. I was trying to find a way out of the situation. How do you make a bully stop bullying you? It's a tough question, right? And so I looked up in the database of our social network in the messaging app we had built where people could exchange messages. I was like, oh yeah, well, maybe I could find something about his life there that I could use against him. And I found a bunch of stuff, a bunch of private things that I was not really supposed to see. And so the next time he came to me at school, I looked at him and I told him that, and he was like, okay, I'm not going to touch you again. Please don't tell people about all my secrets and stuff. So the good thing is I didn't have a bully anymore, but it did make me think, was I right to do that? just because the guy was bullying me, did I have the right to invade his privacy? What gave me this kind of like superhuman access to his private life? Just because I coded the website, it still felt wrong, even though the reason might have been acceptable, right? Yeah. It still was something wrong to do. And so from that day, I was like, damn, if I could do that as a teenager, what can everybody else do? And internet was blowing up, right? This was like the 90s, remember, right? So I was like, oh my God, like how much data is around? And of course, when I started doing bioinformatics, being exposed to genetic data makes you think even more about privacy. And so from that point, I was like, okay, there is no data science, there is no AI, there is no nothing unless we figure out privacy. And so that for me was a clear thing. Since I was a teenager, privacy was an important thing for me. And so that eventually brought me to Zama. So Zama is a company I've been wanting to build for years, actually. I discovered in 2015, while working on Snips, I discovered a technology called homomorphic encryption. Homomorphic encryption is a way where you can basically encrypt data such that you can do processing on it blindly. So for example, imagine I'm a user of Siri. Right now, if I'm talking to Siri, my voice is being sent to Apple servers, which analyzes it and sends back a response. That's fine because you can trust Apple. They're a big company. They have no reason to cheat, whatever. But still, it's not something desirable, right? With homomorphic encryption, you could encrypt the data before you send it. So you would encrypt your voice on your device, send your encrypted voice to Apple servers, who would then do an encrypted AI kind of analysis of it. So it wouldn't know what is getting in, but it also wouldn't know what it's producing as a response. The response itself would be encrypted, sends it back to you, and you can decrypt it. So from your perspective, everything is the same. You're sending something, getting a response, but now nobody can listen or understand what you just asked because everything is encrypted. So this technology is kind of like a holy grail of privacy and data security, because it means that you no longer have to worry about surveillance. No government can access your data, because if they try to access the data in the company's database, it's encrypted anyway, so there's not much they can do about it. Yeah. There is no issues around data theft. No more worrying about hackers stealing the data and putting it on the darknet like it happens every day. No more issues of data security. Who cares which server this is running on if nobody can see the data anyway, right? Like you could do that on a random computer. It doesn't matter anymore. So everything changes. And so when I discovered that, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the solution to privacy. We should make this technology ubiquitously applicable. We should put it everywhere. But in 2015, it was too early, right? Nothing really worked. And so when I exited Snips, when Snips got acquired, a week after the acquisition, I started a company, Homomorphic Encryption, with my co-founder Pascal Payet, who's one of the, I would say, inventors of homomorphic encryption as a whole. Him and I were friends, and so we decided to build a company together. That's how much I believed in building that.
Yeah, that's a pretty quick turnaround, just a week after your previous exit. Okay, so I was looking at the diagram for homomorphic encryption, and this isn't really a super technical series, so we don't need to get into the weeds here. But the way that I was able to visualize it is essentially you're sending this encrypted data to a server. It never gets unencrypted, and somehow the third party is able to query that encrypted data, understand what it needs in order to formulate a response without unencrypting it, and then sending it back. Am I accurate there? And to me, that sounds like it's unencrypted the whole way. So maybe there's some sort of kind of deep, complex mathematical layer there that is above my head. But is that generally the idea?
Exactly. So in mathematics, a homomorphism means that the shape is basically identical, right? So homomorphic means using with the same shape. So homomorphic encryption basically means that when you encrypt the data, even though the data itself is no longer understandable, the structure of the data remains the same, right? So it's like you're translating the data into a different language. That language still has syntax and grammar, even though you don't understand the language itself because you don't have the Rosetta Stone, the secret key to decrypt the data, right? But because it still has syntax and grammar, It can still be manipulated. It's just a sentence, right? You can still do stuff with it. You just don't know what it means, but you can still see structures. You can still see patterns. You can still see all of those things. And that's the idea of homomorphic encryption. You do not understand what the data means, but the data is actually still structured in the same way it was before.
Gotcha. Okay. So there's kind of two things that strike me here. One are, I mean, the urgency with which you launched this company. So obviously there's a timeliness to this. You did mention that 10 years ago this was a little bit too early to make to commercialize. And then the second thing is this whole movement. Yeah, it was an idea. Maybe it was a white paper, but without a real application. And the second thing is kind of the rise of crypto and Web3 and questions of privacy in the broader tech ecosystem. So it seems very timely and relevant and now technologically feasible. I'm curious how you see it fitting into the broader ecosystem. What is a use case here? I'm thinking about. I mentioned in an exchange earlier about all the right things kind of came to be for cryptography, GPUs, high-speed broadband networks, people spending a critical mass of money online. So there was a need for it. What do you think the tipping point is for homomorphic encryption? How do you drive adoption? What are the other puzzle pieces that fall in line here to make this a viable business model and also something that will get adopted?
So there are three problems with homomorphic encryption before. The first problem is it was just not working, right? You could do addition, you could do multiplication, but anything more complicated than that, you couldn't do, right? So you couldn't do machine learning, you couldn't do databases, things that people actually need in practice. This is something we solved. You can now do anything you want with homomorphic encryption. There are no limitations in terms of the application you can build. The second problem was usability. Unless you had a PhD in cryptography, it was impossible to use homomorphic encryption. And so application developers just couldn't use it. This is something we also solved by creating basically a framework called Concrete, which abstracts away all the complexity of homomorphic encryption so that a developer can just write Python code or Rust code just as they would in their applications every day. And that would automatically be converted into a homomorphic equivalent. The final thing that is still missing for homomorphic encryption to be ubiquitously applicable to anything is performance. When you do things encrypted, it's usually 1,000,000 times slower than if you did it without encryption. So something that used to take a second would now take 11 days to complete. Not exactly very user-friendly when everybody is like super impatient of getting a response, and even 5G isn't fast enough, right? And so this is something we're bridging. So it's already 1,000 times faster now. So we went from like 1,000,000x slowdown to 1,000x slowdown. And this final 1,000x speed up that we need, this last mile of performance for homomorphic encryption, is being bridged by specific hardware, so specific chips dedicated to homomorphic encryption. So think about what a GPU did for machine learning and for graphics. Imagine what a GPU type of approach would be for homomorphic encryption. It just won't be a GPU, it'll be something else. This is what's happening now. There's a bunch of companies working on that, and they're going to be producing those chips in the next 2-3 years. So by 2025, homomorphic encryption is going to be a technology that will be fast enough that you can use it anywhere you want. It doesn't matter what you want to do. Anytime every time you're dealing with sensitive user data, you will be using homomorphic encryption. So I can give you a couple of examples if you want, right? So, AI is a good example. Everything is using AI now, right? Voice assistants, your TV, your recorder at home, all this data goes to the cloud. It goes to the cloud for a simple reason, and I know this very well from Snips, is that what you can do locally on device is very limited, right? If you really want to harness the power of AI, you need to do things in the cloud. But then what that means is that whoever is operating the service has access to all your data. With homomorphic encryption, all of AI could be encrypted end-to-end, and you would never have to worry about who's providing the AI service, even though you're using it in your private home and everything else, right? So all of AI, without exception, can benefit from homomorphic encryption. Medical research. You want to share your data with a hospital for medical research on COVID or whatever, some new pandemic, right? Everybody wants to be a good citizen. Everybody wants to chip in, but nobody wants someone to have a centralized database of like your medical records and your DNA, right? I mean, that's literally just putting a huge banner saying, please hackers and bad governments come and steal our data, right? So with homomorphic encryption, you can contribute your data encrypted, right? But people could still use it for research. They could still combine the data, they could analyze it, they could extract patterns from it. And so nobody's individual data would be at risk, even though you would be able to produce, those research outputs. So I think, that's one of the main blockers for medical research is people don't want to contribute because they're scared about what happened to the data. And you mentioned blockchain. I think this is a very important one, if you just allow me. So when you think about a blockchain, everything in a blockchain is public. Why? Because, nodes on the blockchain, validators and miners have to agree on what has been done. Otherwise, there is no consensus. If there is no consensus, there is no blockchain. The problem is that if everything is public, well, everybody knows what you own. Everybody knows what you do. There is no privacy. It's impossible to create blockchain applications that require personal data. If you wanted, for example, to restrict some DeFi product to a specific region, well, that would imply that users send their location with every transaction. But I mean, if you're sending your location with your wallet address, it's asking for a gun to your head the next day. You wouldn't want to do that. If you're using homomorphic encryption, you would be able to offer encrypted smart contracts where everything happening on chain would actually be encrypted. So people have no idea what you're actually doing on the blockchain, right? They wouldn't know how much tokens you own. They wouldn't know what NFT you're using. They wouldn't know your location in your app. You could even put your passport and your biometric data on the blockchain and use it safely because it would be encrypted anyway. So I think that for blockchain, homomorphic encryption is a way to open up the blockchain application to everything that you would want to do privately today, which if you look at your smartphone is pretty much everything, right? Like how many applications would you be comfortable doing publicly? Twitter, Reddit, kind of. That's it, right? Everything else is private. So imagine what we're missing out on blockchain in terms of blockchain applications because of privacy. And this is something that can be fixed with homomorphic encryption.
Yeah, I hadn't even really thought about it in that context, but it sounds like a huge unlock for blockchain. I mean, if you talk about some of the blockchain critiques, a lot of it is specifically around that. You don't want a fully private blockchain because that eliminates the value proposition of blockchain in the first place. But you don't want a fully public blockchain, or there are limited amounts of use cases you can do in a public blockchain specifically for the reasons of privacy. And so this finds like a kind of a unique balance.
It offers you a way to have private applications on top of public, permissionless, decentralized blockchains.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, wow. Yeah, I was thinking about some of that stuff that you mentioned earlier, like how could I participate in a healthcare study, or how do health systems share data? I live abroad, right? So a lot of my health data is based in the U.S. It's got to be a huge pain in the ass for them to be able to get that information over here to share it with my doctor, have a 360 view of my healthcare. This sounds like it could be an ideal solution for that as well. And the key thing is no one cares. The counterintuitive thing about privacy is that no one cares until it's a big problem, and no end user really wants to have to think about it at the end of the day. I don't want to have to do any sort of complex computations in order to ensure my privacy. I want that to be baked in to whatever applications I'm interacting.
That's the idea of privacy by design. Actually, I wrote a blog post about that. The kind of vision blog post for Zama as a company is actually entitled "People Shouldn't Care About Privacy." And I strongly believe that. I think privacy should be a non-issue. You shouldn't care. I shouldn't care. My mother shouldn't care, right? But people shouldn't care because they gave up on it. They shouldn't care because it shouldn't be a problem. And the way to not make it a problem is to have everything encrypted end to end, all the time, everywhere, constantly. That's how you solve privacy. And that's what homomorphic encryption is here to do. Homomorphic encryption is here to make privacy irrelevant because it won't be a problem anymore to think about.
Well, it sounds like some interesting stuff. I'm curious, as a second-time entrepreneur, maybe more than second, but in the two that we've covered, has it come any more easily, or what's been your experience as a second-time founder?
Oh my God, it's so much easier the second time. I used to spend so much time on things which didn't really move the needle, right? like trying to figure out some new management structure for the company, or spending a huge amount of time doing PR before the product was ready, or things like that. And you realize that at the end of the day, what really matters is the technology, the product, the team that you assemble. We're not in the business of inventing a new management structure, right? We're just going to use what's already proven it works, right? So I think, we're a lot more efficient because I know what's actually important to focus on in the company right now and what is just a waste of time at that point. The second thing also is I'm a lot more confident in the decisions I make. I know that some things won't work. I know that some things take time. I know that everything takes longer than we expect. And once you know that and you've seen it play out, you kind of don't feel as stressed out when things don't move as fast as you want. It just makes you more patient, more calm, less stressed out about every decision you're making. Is it the right one? Is it the wrong one? It doesn't matter as long as on average I'm right. The company's going in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear. I'm curious. So I've been doing a lot of research on French tech specifically, but more broadly, European tech ecosystem. And a common trend I've seen is that as ecosystems mature, there tend to be more exits, and with exits and success comes kind of a second wave of entrepreneurs. So people who are doing their second entrepreneurial stint, they have the experience that you just alluded to, and a little bit more confidence, a little bit more direction. They've kind of seen this game before. But another component there is that when there's an exit and there's financial success, people tend to move into angel investing as well and mentorship. And that's something that I was reading up on earlier this week. Some of your interest as someone who has a quite varied interest, but also some entrepreneurial experience and successes. You've taken some of that knowledge and put it into, I guess you could call it an angel syndicate, essentially. And a lot of the topics that we covered today actually fit quite neatly into your investment thesis. So I think you listed 6 or so criteria, things around privacy, blockchain, high performance computing, medical hardware, bioinformatics, and psychedelics. I think you tweaked that slightly before. You were a little bit more narrow on quantum computing, medtech, microbiome, and some of that has been folded into the higher level topics. Could you talk about kind of how you came up with your thesis and what has been your approach to angel investing? Because as a first-time angel investor, someone who's kind of new to the investing game.
Of course. So first of all, I only invest in things I understand, right? There are many, many topics that I think is fun, but I don't understand it, so I won't invest in it. I'm not a consumer investor. I'm not a marketplace investor. I'm not a B2B SaaS investor. I don't understand those businesses. What I do understand is technology. And I understand technology usually earlier than most people would see this technology appear in a product, because I'm fortunate enough to have a scientific background as well. So I can take a look at a scientific paper years before this gets implemented into a product that people are going to be using. And so I felt that, this combination of being a deep tech entrepreneur myself, plus having a scientist background, kind of gave me a unique edge in the investment space in Europe. Because when you look at the profile of most VCs in Europe, less than 25% of them have someone on their team with a science background, right? And often those people are not even partners. So the people making the investments are not scientists. And you cannot really blame them for not investing in deep tech, because they don't have the ability to understand deep tech in their teams until this deep tech has become a product and they can try the product and understand the business. But the first 5 years of a deep tech company, which is all about R&D, there is no product, there is no market, there is no money, right? There is science. And it takes a very, very specific skill to be able to make a bet and invest in a company when all you've got is a piece of paper with some math on it, right? And this is really where I think that I can make a difference, right? Is I can look at this paper and be like, if those founders can pull this off, this is how much impact it will have on the industry. And so the question really becomes, are these the right founders to do it, right? And it all comes down to that. Are these the right people to do it? So my thesis really was just, okay, I know that, there is going to be a huge disruption of the semiconductor space. So I want to invest in that. I know that, bio post-COVID is going to be a major deal because everybody is now freaking out realizing that, oh my God, we thought, medicine was modern, but then we can't even cope with a small pandemic, right? I mean, a big pandemic, but you get the point, right? So everybody's like, okay, we have to take, healthcare and medicine into the next century. So huge influx of people working in this space. Anyways, so that's how I built my thesis. I looked at things I knew, I looked at things I was interested in, and I decided to invest pre-seed and seed in companies that other investors typically don't understand. And that's why my newsletter is so popular, is because I'm sharing deals that people don't see, right? I think that's also what made me a successful angel investor, is I'm able to relate to the founders and invest when nobody will.
Yeah. Well, your edge as a scientist and as a deep tech founder yourself is very clear. I'm curious what elements you had to augment or learn during the first, let's say 6 to 12 months of your investing. Where did you need to backfill? What was part of the learning process?
So I'm a data scientist, right? I love data. What that means is that investing or not investing, if I can collect data and look at patterns, I'm happy. So the first thing I wanted, before I was going to say publicly that I think I know what I'm doing, I wanted to have invested enough money and time and made enough deals. And I wanted to see enough of those deals play out to be able to say, okay, statistically, this is what works, this is what doesn't work. This is the kind of deals that, I like doing, and so on and so forth. So I've been very actively investing. Right. I've invested in over 50 companies in the last couple of years to collect data. I mean, also because I wanted to, right? Obviously, but also as a way to collect data and tracking them. I mean, I have an Excel spreadsheet, which quite frankly is way overkill for an angel investor, but it tracks everything. I have all kinds of graphs and all kinds of metrics and everything. I'm like, okay, so when I look at my portfolio, it looks like something that isn't random. I didn't get lucky, right? Like I have a distribution of returns, which is quite nice. I have a value of my portfolio, which goes up over time. It doesn't look random. Right. And this is the only thing I was looking for. I was looking for a signal that what I was doing was right before I could actually kind of kick off to the next gear. And this is what I'm going to be doing next. I'm actually going to quintuple the size of my investment tickets in the next couple of years. Right. So instead of investing, 25 to 100K, I'm going to be investing 250 to $1 million in companies going forward. That's because I feel confident I can do that now.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me a little bit about the deal flow process? I would imagine as someone who's somewhat of a known quantity in the French and European tech ecosystem, that's certainly helpful. You mentioned you post on Substack some of your deal flow and share your deal flow, which I think is an interesting approach. The other thing, I guess, that is adjacent to this is in the pre-seed and seed round. When I've been working at a VC for 7 months, 8 months now, and the growth stage versus the kind of the Series A versus the pre-IPO versus the seed round. Each one of these stages requires a different skill set, a different approach. So what makes a good deal for you at the pre-seed or seed stage in deep tech, and can you kind of walk me through the step by step?
I don't know anything about growth stage. Right. I've done a few pre-IPO deals to look at what it looks like. I don't get it. It's a finance game, right? Eventually I'll learn how to do it, but right now it's not really what I'm good at. What I'm really good at is pre-seed and seed investing, because that's when everything is about technical risk and founder market fit. Founder market fit is basically figuring out, are these founders the right people to solve that problem in this market, right? And can they actually build the technology they say they're going to be building, right? So understanding founder market fit. So what I find is very good, being a founder myself, is when you talk to founders, they talk to you as founders, right? Like there's a founder to founder connection, which is very different when you're a VC, where they talk to you as a VC. Founder to founder, we know the struggle. We know what it feels like, right? And so there is no, there is no political correctness, right? They say things as it is, right? This is what I think is possible. This is where I think the risk is. So I know exactly what they actually believe and where they see the risk being. It's not a rosy picture like you do see a lot of VCs getting. The second thing is, I read the papers. I look at the technology and I'm like, okay, this looks radically different. If these guys can pull this off, women or guys, if they can pull this off, this will be a major breakthrough compared to the other incremental stuff people are doing in the field. And if there is such a breakthrough, this would enable XYZ market. And this is an interesting opportunity. So it's really just about, is this addressing a big problem? And is it doing it in a way that is a disruptive, breakthrough, technological way? And are these the right people to do it? And then in terms of figuring out deal flow is just marketing, right? It's no different than getting deal flow of customers in your company. You do inbound, you do outbound. I do a lot of efforts to get inbound deal flow, right? So my newsletter, my reputation, some tweeting, some talks, that's a way that people can see my name and know what I'm investing in so that they can reach out to me. And again, being a founder means that people are not afraid of reaching out to me, right? I got people reaching out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on like Reddit, on like random places, because I'm not a VC, right? I'm just a founder, they're a founder, so it's easy for us to talk together. So I get a lot of inbound and is very highly qualified because people know I only do deep tech. So nobody's sending me consumer or B2B deals, right? Or SaaS deals, they send me deep tech deals. And then there is outreach, right? There's a few areas that I monitor very closely, and I look at all the open source projects, I look at the papers, and I literally just reach out to the people behind them, being like, hey, interesting research, do you have any plans on building a company? Sometimes they're like, yes, we're setting up a company, by the way. I'm like, great, perfect timing. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I'd love to find a co-founder. And I even try to introduce people to their co-founders if I know, right? If I can. So I try to be helpful, I try to be proactive, keeping in mind, of course, that I have a full-time job at Zama, so I can only do that 20% of my time. But I think it's marketing, inbound, outbound. You reach out and people come to you. You have to maximize both.
I as a self-proclaimed kind of deep tech enthusiast, I'm a huge fan of kind of picturing you sifting through a bunch of papers, uncovering a diamond in the rough that's going to be this next breakthrough technology. I think that's the coolest the coolest approach to angel investing that there is. So. I want to be respectful of time. I know you've got you mentioned 50 companies. I had a look at maybe 10 or 15 of them. Maybe there's one company that you've invested in that you're particularly bullish on or excited about, just to refresh your memory in case you've been focused on other things. Gilgamesh, the psychedelics for mental health, was one that stood out to me. CrunchDAO, the market neutral hedge fund. Interstellar Labs, the biopods for kind of an interstellar human race. I think there's a million out there that we could cover. Anything that comes to mind that you'd want to share today?
I don't think I have a favorite investment, right? I mean, I made those.
It's kind of like your children, you can't admit.
Who's your favorite kid, right? Honestly, I like all the investments I've made, right? And most of those investments, I'm very close to the founders, and we talk on a regular basis. Some of those companies, however, I'm involved a little bit more actively as an advisor. So I could talk more about those companies if you want. So one of them, for example, is a great company called Chipiron. I love that company. They're going to do amazing. They're basically building a miniature MRI. So it's an MRI machine that is 10 times cheaper and smaller than the traditional ones we have right now, while keeping a high level of resolution so that you can actually see stuff with it. Why is that important? Well, it's not important for hospitals that already have MRIs, but it's very important for enabling developing countries and rural regions who don't have access to expensive MRIs to actually do medical imaging. So I think it opens up and it democratizes access to MRIs to everybody in the world. And the team is fantastic. The CTO is one of the smartest guy I've ever met. Like, I knew nothing about MRIs before I met the guy. And I spoke to him for like an hour. It was like, I think I understood everything about MRIs. That for me is like, that is one of the ways that I judge if a founder is good. If they can explain things well, then they understand them well, right?
Sure.
So I really like this company. They're going to be raising their seed round in Q4. I invested in pre-seed. CrunchDAO is an amazing one. It's not really deep tech though, so I don't think I would put it in the deep tech category. CrunchDAO is more of like a DeFi investment, but the way they do it is really clever. They have basically this DAO with 1,000 people in it participating in weekly prediction tournaments of where the stocks is going to go, and they're using that signal to trade the markets. And all of that is then funneled back into a token which captures the performance of the fund. So it's the first time that someone built basically like a hedge fund DAO where the token is actually correlated with the fund's performance. right? Which is the big difference with Numerai typically, right? So I think these guys are going to do amazingly well, amazingly well. They're so good at community building. They're going to do amazing. Another one in psychedelics. So psychedelics is super interesting. I'm very much into mental health for personal reasons. I think it's one of the most stigmatized, undiscussed issues in our world. Maybe a little bit more in the US, but in Europe, like if you have mental health issues, no, that's not a thing you should talk about. I think it's something we should talk about. In the US, 25% of people under the age of 30 thought about suicide in the last 6 months. Something's happening, something is wrong in this planet, and people are feeling it, and it's not doing them good. Psychedelics is a miracle treatment for mental health that we've known existed since the 60s, right? But it was for political reasons kind of like, put aside, and it's now coming back. It's now being legalized in the United States. And importantly, we now have companies building next generation psychedelics, so something different than LSD and ketamine and mushrooms and everything, which are much more precise in the effects you can get. And one company in particular that I've invested in, called MindState, is building this AI model of how different drugs affect different receptors in your brain, so that they can predict which effect you're going to get exactly. So they can say that, okay, if you take this drug and this drug, you're going to activate this receptor and this receptor, which is going to produce this effect and this effect. And by having this model, they can do precision psychedelics where they can trigger exactly what you want for a specific condition that you might have. So that's the kind of stuff I'm excited about, right? Like it's a biotech company, but with a very strong data kind of like modeling play behind it. And I believe that that's how you bridge the gap. Gilgamesh is a little bit further in their development, right? They have like de novo things. I think MindState is more data driven. Gilgamesh is an insane, amazing team of academics building next generation psychedelics. That's a huge space, something very excited about in general.
Yeah. Well, I think we could probably talk for another hour. We missed a number of things: Ethereum, predictions for the future, longevity stuff. I mean, I'd love to grab a coffee and talk more about it. I think the future of mental health is a positive note to end on, and I'm also very excited about that space. So awesome that you're investing there. Thanks so much for taking the time. It was fascinating. Very cool to follow along in your investing journey, and now I'm even more interested in homomorphic encryption. I'm gonna have to do some more digging.
Thank you, Kyle. This was great. Really happy to have done this. Thank you.